Hello everyone, and welcome to part 6, the final part of Unity of Command 2 Victory in the West campaign on hard, and by God, I'm so glad it's finally over. Today we'll handle all of the missions of the 6th conference, historical and ahistorical alike, and the sole mission of the 7th conference. Unthinkable but true. The historic branch is still the easier part of this, even though I'm happy to say that some of those missions offer a nice little increase in challenge compared to the previous conference, and the ahistoric branch has some of the most difficult missions that this campaign has to offer, and because of this, to accompany this video, I am publishing the full playthroughs of Liberation of Bohemia and Dash to Berlin on my second channel, Slothoboomer Couch Buttock. So if you feel like you need some advice, maybe take a peek at a successful playthrough of this, and I'm not blaming you, these are some of the most difficult missions in the campaign, go ahead and check out those playthroughs and my commentary on that channel. Also, now that I've completed the entirety of the Victory in the West campaign on hard, actually twice, both for historic and ahistoric branches, I must say that the campaign is a lot of fun, and because so many troops, so many HQs will stay for longer with you, you get that sense of belonging that was kind of missing in Moscow 41 and some of those German DLCs as well. It's absolutely wonderful to lead a British army from North Africa all the way into Bohemia, and Third Army under Patton from D-Day all the way to the Unthinkable. And to you, the viewer, the player, I say, if you're going for the Victory in the West campaign and trying to play it well on high difficulty, keep in mind that for the most part, the historic branch is going to be easier, even though it's still a lot of fun following the actual events of the war, and I suggest you to deliberately miss certain objectives to take the Sheld and the 4th Casino missions, which are also historical. The ahistorical is obviously more difficult, and the game keeps warning you about it, but in any case, this campaign is big enough for you to have two very enjoyable and somewhat different playthroughs of it. After all, 45-something missions means a bunch of evenings you can spend with this game. And finally, let me encourage all of you who play this game on easy and normal to try classic and hard. While it's fine to go for easier modes, you have your own situation and I'm not criticizing you for it. And while it's not required to graduate to high difficulty levels, you certainly do get a different kind of gameplay on higher levels of difficulty, and you might be missing out on something if you don't try them. Good luck. Let's look at the missions now. If you have played the ahistoric branch of the campaign by the time you get to Po Valley, you'll be immediately reminded of the Road from Rimini mission back in Conference 3. And in fact, if you have any experience dealing with that battle, it'll help you a lot in this one too. Especially since most of your attention should be directed towards that eastern area. Don't overcommit your forces in the west, as you can see it's not guarded by virtually anyone, and I guess since we're already talking about it, let's talk about it. First, don't commit any British-led troops to it, and only use one American tank division and maybe 3 or 4 American infantry divisions to deal with La Spezia, Milano, and Torino. For Savona, you have those French troops not shown here. The 2 divisions you're provided with are more than enough to take Savona, so just push them forward and use your HQ there to feed your troops emergency supplies. Also, forget about that French division advancing through the mountains, it's not gonna take Torino for you. Another important point you should keep in mind is that the supply situation for the Germans and Italians here is pretty poor. They're only fed through Milano, and if you cut it off La Spezia, that can be a little difficult. We'll just run out of supply and fall to your attacks very quickly. And obviously, once your American troops break through the first defensive line at Bologna, you should send a division into the mountains to deal with La Spezia. In addition to that infantry division in the east of the town, send a division or two to Verona and then turn them towards Milano. This will help you keep those bridges intact, and I found this to be a slightly easier way towards Milano that doesn't involve using any of your tanks. And speaking of which, get the weakest of your American-controlled tank divisions and send it straight to the west to ultimately deal with Torino. By that time, the French divisions attacking Savona will have probably dealt with Savona and Genova and probably cleared that whole area and might help you out in Torino. The east, unsurprisingly, is very much like road from Rimini, except that the Germans haven't prepared a proper defense there, but you'll still have to rush your tanks forwards with as much force as you can. Deck out both of your British divisions and get that American division and send it to the east as well. Your goal here, rushing towards Venezia and ultimately Udine and Trieste, will be to hold bridges by the ends of turns so that the enemy doesn't blow them up, and you will often have to use your armor to attack towns, so make sure these guys are really well equipped for that. In any case, if you manage to reach Udine and Trieste by the end of turn 6, you are doing really well. You have plenty of time to take both these towns and reach Villach, which have thankfully never seen defended. Like in Road from Rimini, the game actually warns you about giving the British HQ level 3 engineering, and once again, it doesn't really need all of those assault crossing or anything. You will just set up your bridges just north of Bologna and east of the enemy positions, and just push your tanks through. It's actually much easier than Road from Rimini because once again, the German defenses are virtually non-existent. So use your infantry to mop them up. Once again, don't waste your tanks' time, and send 2 infantry divisions to attack Trento. I usually send 1 British division to approach it from the east, and split off one of the American divisions that went to Verona to push from the south. The defenders of Trento follow the general trend and will be rather pathetic even if completely fortified, and will not put up much of a fight. Plus, this is the last Mediterranean mission of the historic branch of the campaign that you'll see, so if you need to take some losses, accept them. It really warmed my heart that a mission called Plunder turned out to be fairly good and easy fun. And it actually has a trick to it, because what losing session is good without a trick? It's actually something the game doesn't warn you about. The trick is actually giving your 3rd US Army HQ the 3rd level in engineering, which is not entirely useless elsewhere and turns this mission into a walk in the park. Because as you can see, the 3rd Army is perfectly positioned to advance south of Frankfurt am Main, and the only problem is that Rhine crossing, which is the usual problem in these missions. So go get that level 3 engineering, blast that infantry division, assault cross, repair the bloody bridge, and then push all of your tanks into the breach. The goal of the 3rd Army here is going to be twofold. First, it must advance north and cut off that pocket with Frankfurt in it from its supply. In addition to Frankfurt being one of the main objectives, this pocket will ultimately deliver you the prisoners you sorely need to fully succeed in this mission. The second task for the 3rd Army will be to take Fulda and Kassel. As you can see, they're not defended at the beginning of the mission, and in my experience, they're not by the time you take them. The Germans will probably muster some screening units, but none of these objectives is going to be a problem, especially with a crossing in the south. And especially since the 1st Army is going to help out with destroying the mechanized group of the Germans have accumulated in the area between Bonn and Koblenz. None of these German divisions should pose any threats, and your 1st Army tanks should very easily grind through them, quickly break out and push towards Paderborn and Kassel. And there's that. most of the map is done. Now on to the north. The game actually reminds you of giving level 3 engineering to your British HQ, and it isn't such a bad idea because it's most probably going to be the only way you cross to the other side. My approach with vessel crossing, it can be a little risky, is spending all of your air supports on that hex, and then either dropping the American paratroopers on that hex and taking it, or sending an assault crossing party, the latter having a higher chance of a good outcome, while the British paratroopers should go into that little nameless town northeast of vessel crossing. That junction is completely undefended and it feeds all the German troops in the north. Actually, the specific choice of the paratrooper division there depends on how experienced your paratrooper divisions are, and the most experienced ones should go into that town, because the Germans will send everything they can to dislodge the invaders, and a strong elite airborne division should hold out pretty well. If your British HQ is good enough, you can stage another assault crossing in the plain hex northwest of vessel crossing, but the ultimate point is building those bridges and then pushing all your tanks, both the Brits and the US 9th Army tanks, into the breach and destroying everything in their way, reaching Münster and taking it. Be careful about the supply situation around Münster, it might be a little difficult, and don't expect these tanks to go any further than that, especially since the 1st and the 3rd will have dealt with Paderborn and everything in the south. Danube is actually the mission that caused me to restart this conference. And let me just tell you, the time for joking around with level 3 engineering is over. You really need to cross that Rhine. And while I still think that only having assault crossing in your 7th army is enough to complete this mission, giving the assault crossing ability to the French makes this mission so much easier. So please go for it, and I'm assuming that you will in this explanation. Alright, so your initial moves here are pretty obvious. Unlike the very similar Battle for Bavaria scenario in the ahistoric campaign, assault crossings between Karlsruhe and Mannheim aren't such a suicidal idea, as this time the AI is somewhat defensive and will prefer to retreat to a slightly better position rather than counterattack. If you have the command points to do that, try to create 2 breaches there, use air support if necessary, and build those pontoon bridges so that your tanks can move in next turn. On the French side, it's pretty obvious. Try an assault cross to the hex next to Freiburg, and once again repair that bridge. In general, like in so many missions, the French are playing a secondary role here, and the immediate objective will be to push towards Tuttlingen. It shouldn't be too difficult, it's not well defended as you can see, and your French infantry divisions and one of the French tank divisions should be enough to handle that task. And I say one tank division because I usually send the other French tank division with the Americans in the north. Past Tuttlingen, the French should advance further. Their main objective here will be Fern Pass, although they may be helpful in destroying the German troops around Ulm. This is an important bridge and railway junction, and the AI loves accumulating a bunch of force in there. If your French HQ has motorization, the French can also be a good source of infantry in this harder to reach München Eagle's Nest area of the map. Remember that Eagle's Nest is a mountain hex. You can't take your tanks in there. You need an infantry division, and while Americans, combined with motorization, can actually reach that location, it's a shorter route for the French. One final point about the French operations in this mission. After your initial crossings, you should secure the bridge next to Strasbourg and actually repair it, and then clear the stretch of the railway leading from Strasbourg to Karlsruhe. This is virtually the only easy railway connection between your sources of supply and the area around and beyond Stuttgart. You will really need that railway connection, so repair that bridge and clear all the Germans in that area. This should be a priority in the first few turns of the mission. Mannheim could be an alternative, but given the difficulty of the location and fortifications and everything, I don't think think it's viable. Go Strasbourg, it's easy. As for what to do past this area, and I'm assuming you will have no trouble destroying the German infantry and hopefully the mechanized troops the Germans have in this area, you should follow the deadlines for your objectives, and the fact that Nuremberg needs to be taken before you take Stuttgart is a clear indication that you should push your tanks forward as quickly as possible, leaving Stuttgart to your infantry and pushing your HQ forward as well as soon as your railway connection goes up. Obviously, sending a few infantry divisions along with those tanks is a good idea, especially since you will need someone to hold Nuremberg. You will not be able to easily clear that area just yet. Plus, the AI absolutely loves blowing the bridges in this area, especially between Nuremberg and München. All those bridges are very much subject to destruction. Not having these bridges within your HQ's range is one of the biggest mistakes you can make in this mission. Also, as you advance towards Nuremberg, make sure that you have at least 1 or 2 tank divisions diverted directly to München, and their immediate task will be to secure those bridges, either by clearing the hexes next to them if you're lucky, or at least standing next to them and letting your HQ repair them without the Germans blowing them up again. At this point, try to commit as few tanks as possible to taking Nuremberg. With motorization, your infantry should keep up and actually help out taking that city. Past that, your tanks should push south towards München and Regensburg. And while München will be somewhat straightforward, your only problem there will be blown bridges. And if you're fast enough, not even that, and make sure to bring up your HQ as well. And the same is true about everything past München. You'll just keep advancing and clearing the area and bringing that infantry division to take Eagle's Nest. Linz is way too far for all of that. The deadline for it is turn 11 compared to, say, Fern Pass, which is 13, and you can actually take it much earlier using your French troops. Linz can be tricky, and it will not fault you if you decide to use paratroopers there. It's never defended. But taking it with that cards requires sending 2 tank divisions and maybe 1 infantry division to Regensburg. The objective itself shouldn't be too much of a problem, but if it takes a few losses, accept them. But as you are trying to take the objective, push 1 tank division immediately along that railway towards Linz. It's about 2 full moves for a tank division to reach from Regensburg to Linz, and it is very achievable. The difficult bit here lies in the fact that the supply is not very easy and the railway goes through Regensburg, and your answer to that should be taking Regensburg as quickly as possible and then plopping an infantry division there, which will prevent any German attacks coming in the direction of that town, plus you'll get your railway, and having your HQ in the area around München and maybe clearing the space between Regensburg and München so that the HQ can provide emergency supplies to your tanks as they advance towards Linz. Alright, I know that ended the Elbe is properly scary. Right off the bat, you are thrown into the deep end, with you just looking everywhere and not knowing where to start. And here's me telling you to just not worry. There are things to make it slightly better. The first mistake that you can easily make here is splitting your HQs. By that I mean, say, you take the Third Army and you send the tanks to the east and the infantry to the west. That's a terrible idea, as this will effectively prevent you from properly using your HQs. And so your goal will be to specialize. The already mentioned Third Army under Patton will go east and southeast towards the Chemnitz and meeting at the Elbe objectives, which are not shown here because the map is way too big, and also handling the southern advance for the Magdeburg objective. In this area, you should push as quickly as you can, repairing the bridges, and also ultimately, as you reach Leipzig and Chemnitz, make sure to guard those bridges so that the AI doesn't blow them up, and it loves blowing them up, and it can easily become a mission-ending event. This deep thrust will also be supported by the supply hub, for which the optimal location is just north of the original position for the Third Army HQ. Speaking of the initial supplies, if you are playing like me, you should have a supply card. Please use it. This is the last mission in this entire campaign and throw all the resources you've got into this mission and to succeeding in it. Next up, the first US army is going to be tasked with taking Köln and Ruhr. And this is where you might make another mistake by not being aggressive enough. The point here is that this pocket is not just about the Köln and Ruhr objectives. More importantly, it is about the railway that connects your supply source with the rest of the map. It runs straight through Köln, Düsseldorf and Dortmund, and it is critical for your long-term survival and success in this mission. So a reasonable goal here is to clear that section of the railway controlled by the enemy by the end of Term 3. So send your first army to deal with it, take as much ground right from the very beginning, and don't worry about the losses. You won't need the first army for anything else, and you're not seeing these divisions ever again, so push and push and push. Importantly, the Köln objective gives you another supply truck card, which you should use immediately. Once again, you can't use it anywhere else. The US 9th Army HQ is gonna have a bit more of a mixed purpose. The main focus of all or most of its tanks should be advancing towards the east, across Hanover and Braunschweig, and forming the northern and probably the main pincer attack leading towards Magdeburg. Although Magdeburg is a relatively urgent objective, I actually let these tanks sit for a turn in well-supplied hexes so that I can comfortably use them for a couple of turns, advancing east, which is particularly pertinent because the bridge leading to Hanover is destroyed. Once it's back up and your little tanks are fed, rush into that valley and push towards Magdeburg. The infantry of the 9th Army can stay around the Ruhr pockets, it's not going to be needed elsewhere, and if experienced and well equipped, it can be instrumental in the initial pushes towards Dortmund from the north. The task for the Canadian 1st Army HQ is going to be very simple. Reach the Reach North Sea objective, take it, and don't lose your tanks in the process. As you can see, it's not a well-defended objective. The bigger problem is the terrain and lack of supply. So get that HQ close to business and dispense all of those emergency supplies as necessary. I also like to send one British tank division in that area, but I don't think it's really necessary. And finally, on to the British HQ. Its main and virtually the only objective is going to be Lübeck, and if your British tank divisions have remained strong, elite, and well equipped, you're not gonna face any combat-related obstacles on your way to Lübeck. It's a good idea to send 2 tank divisions and that paratrooper division along the railway just in case you need to do an assault crossing in Hamburg. Your bigger concern there will be the supply, which should be handled by taking the Ruhr pocket by the time it does become important. And it is also a good idea not to forget to move your British 2nd Army HQ closer to the Lübeck objective, because you will almost certainly have to do an assault crossing at Hamburg or build bridges next to it. In any case, neither Lübeck nor Hamburg are well protected, they will not be well protected, and the deadline is really lax for Lübeck, so it's somewhat difficult to make irreparable mistakes there.
Operation Stapler involves using short pieces of thin wire to connect sheets of paper and laughing maniacally. Ha ha. Ha ha! Seriously though, despite this somewhat difficult look, this mission is the easiest one of the 6th and 7th conferences in the Victory in the West campaign, and there's one big trick you need to know to succeed in it very handily. Look at the area between Osnabrück, Hanover, Bremen, Wilhelmshaven and Emden, and forget about it right now and forever. While you should obviously maintain your front line just in case, all of your tanks and maybe some infantry should advance towards Hanover and then Hamburg. Don't forget about Stendal as well, I actually did once. The defenders of Wilhelmshaven are not supplied by anything other than the railways leading from Hamburg. So once you block that railway, you'll just ride through empty fields, and I actually usually devote tank division, maybe an infantry division, to move north from Hanover to Wilhelmshaven to take that objective. All of the rest of the tanks should push towards Hamburg, move up your HQs, build those bridges across the Rhine, kick the defenders of Hamburg out, and advance towards Wismar and Kiel
those should not be difficult objectives, and given the dense network of railways, you're not gonna have any trouble maintaining supply. In Denmark, it might be a little trickier. Just a little, I promise. So send all of your landing parties and take Esbjerg, and obviously your next objective will be Aalborg Airport, but you should keep an eye on that tank division. In order to feed the troops advancing towards Aalborg, you will have to set up a supply hub about halfway between Esbjerg and Aalborg. The problem is that the Germans will love blocking your supply by taking that road intersection leading towards that supply hub, or any sections of that road for that matter. So set up 2 infantry divisions to block that entire peninsula along the line between Esbjerg and the Baltic Sea coast on the opposite side of the peninsula. The infantry itself and the zone of control it exerts will prevent any cheekiness by the Germans, and giving those divisions maybe 17-pounders might also be a good idea. Your remaining forces, i.e. the tank division and your best equipped infantry division, should push towards Aalborg, in addition to your Canadian HQ, and here's another reason to give the Canadians the high engineering level abilities, because you will face a major river at Aalborg, and being able to do at least an assault crossing to a hex next to the defenders of the airports is a really good idea. That hex is also a plain hex, so feel free to fire suppress them into oblivion. The Alpine Redoubt mission doesn't look like a lot of trouble at it, because it isn't. Pretty much all of the difficulty will stem from the supply problems, because you will get only one truck and you will use it in the Innsbruck area. It's pretty much unavoidable, and the only really tricky objective to take is Linz, an absolute throwback to the Rhin Danube mission in the historic branch of the campaign. And the strategy here is virtually the same. Clear the area and use your tank divisions to bypass the defenders at Regensburg and rush towards Linz. Try your best to prevent the AI from blowing up those bridges. It will love to do that. And obviously it's a good idea to equip the units facing Regensburg at the beginning of the mission with really good specialist steps, so they can make very quick work of all of the defenders in there, and ultimately, hopefully, re-establish railway connection and supplies towards Regensburg and ultimately Linz, which I've never seen defended, but this time your tanks rushing past it will actually be helpful in taking Salzburg, and if it involves a few losses, so be it. You're not gonna see these troops ever again. As for the rest of the objectives, this is gonna be an infantry slog. Use all of your infantry divisions to take Innsbruck. Remember that it's a turn 2 objective, so don't tarry. That's pretty much the limit of their usefulness, though you can advance past Innsbruck and maybe tie up some of the German divisions, while your main push from München should be as quick as possible just to prevent those bridges from being blown. The bridges leading to Kitzbühel and Eagle's Nest, and Kitzbühel being the harder one. You might need to actually go through the mountain just north of it to actually play out the breach duo scenario, with one of the divisions doing a set-piece attack and the other one taking the objectives, because yes, it's very likely to be heavily fortified by the time you arrive in that location. Eagle's Nest, on the other hand, is very unlikely to be very difficult. That mechanized division is going to remain there, even though I've seen the AI rush it towards München and maybe past it if it sees an opening to block bridges, block supply. But if you keep your front line tight, it'll stay in that forest. Back when I did my first attempts tackling liberation of Bohemia, I expected it to be easy, a pushover, and it's really nothing of the kind. It's comfortably in the top 5 of the most difficult missions in the entire campaign, and if you look at the map showing all the enemy troops, you can see why. The Germans are provided with crabloads of well-equipped tanks, very capable of eating through all of your forces and then ask for seconds. And so, in addition to taking all of the objectives on time, you need to do everything to destroy these tanks, especially the Panthers. And your first step towards that will be to retreat your forces east of Vienna and blow up all the bridges behind them, including the bridge next to the German tank division. Force it to retreat somehow and blow the bridge up. On subsequent turns, the AI will launch an offensive in that area, and without the bridges, it'll have to cross the river directly, become stuck on your bank, and be very vulnerable to cornering. This is a very good chance to actually destroy a couple of enemy tank divisions. In addition to a bunch of infantry, keep doing this for as long as you want, for as long as the Germans continue advancing. Another point about the initial positioning in the American sector of the front is the town of Znaim, which you are not required to hold, but you easily can. If well equipped, especially with engineers, those Brazilians will hold out and can actually provide fire support against advancing Germans, because as you remember, fire suppression doesn't remove fortification for the attacker. Another important note is the supply, which will be very difficult in this mission. Look at where I've put my supply hub. I think it's the optimum location for it. And if you have a supply truck card, which you should, feel free to use it right off the bat, because you'll get a replacement at Brunn. Alright, now let's look at the Brits, which will handle the more active part of the mission, at least at the beginning. Your first and obvious step will be to push towards Budweis, and your goal here is to hold a hex next to Budweis by the end of turn 1. It is an interesting puzzle in and of itself. I'm not going to explain it right here. Let me just point your direction to the specialist steps that the divisions immediately facing the enemy have, and let you figure this one out, although remember that recon in force can help you out, clearing enemy zones of control or removing level 3 enemy stragglers. On turn 2, concentrate your forces on Budweis, take the town, destroy that infantry division completely, and then if that mechanized division right now sitting in Pilsen is near Budweis, it sometimes is, destroy it and send one less important infantry division to take Pilsen. It's not an urgent objective, and once you deal with that mechanized division, it's not going to be defended by anyone. If you don't see that mechanized division, it's probably still sitting in Pilsen, and sending a tank division of your own and an infantry division there is a good idea. In any case, once you take Pilsen, move those guys out of that area, because I've found that approaching Prague from the direction of Pilsen is not a very good idea. It's too well protected, and you need more troops in the middle of the map anyway. Also, once you take Budweis, push your troops north. Along that railway, try to destroy those mechanized divisions. You need to get as close to Prague as possible, as quickly as possible. The paratroopers inside of it tend to get the second step of fortifications, and the AI loves destroying the bridge leading to the town. So it's a really good idea to have at least 2 infantry divisions and a tank division all within the range of your HQ right before the deadline for taking Prague. Your British forces in the middle of the map, especially the tanks like the New Zealand tank division, which is very likely to be one of your best ones, should cautiously advance in the middle of the map and trying to destroy as many troops around them as possible. Don't give in to the temptation of advancing way too far. Once again, the Germans have plenty of mechanized reinforcements, and they'll just surround, corner, and destroy your tank divisions, and you can't afford any losses here. Try to whittle them down and advance towards Brunn. Pardubitz is probably not going to be too well defended, and the tank division you used to take Prague will probably reach Pardubitz in time and take it. Your main thrust should be directed at Brunn, and once you see that the British are in a good position to do that, Prague is about to be taken, the middle of the map is clear, there are a couple of options you can do as Americans depending on the situation. If the coast is suspiciously clear east of Vienna, you can actually repair the bridge leading north and push your infantry and your American tank division across the river towards Brunn and most importantly Olmütz, which is unlikely to be well defended, but it's distant enough for you to not quite reach the town in time, so be pretty aggressive there as the British are pushing from the west. Now, if you see weakness west of Brunn, then use your American forces to break out at Znaim, clear the area around Brunn, build pontoon bridges, potentially take Brunn. You're gonna have really good infantry there to do that, and then rush across the river and take Olmütz. Finally, don't expect to do any meaningful maneuvers between Pardubitz and Olmütz. The two towns are way too distant for you to send any troops from one to another and expect any useful results. Good luck. Dash to Berlin is a perfect storm of all the features that make your life terrible in a Unity of Command 2 mission. You getting a weak attacking force with no reinforcements? Check. The enemy nasty to begin with and getting worse as the mission progresses? Check. Supply catastrophe? Check. Blown up bridges? Check. Difficult objective at the very end of the mission? Check, check, check. There are 3 of those. Dash to Berlin is an absolute arsehole and will eat your brain cells by the spoonful. I am not promising you any easy success in this one, but let's start unpacking it with the supply situation. So the railway route that you'll have to clear to have as few supply problems as you can in this mission runs between Kassel and Erfurt, then Gera, then Leipzig, and then ultimately Magdeburg, which, as you can see, is not easily connected. Don't bother with any of the other branches you see at the beginning of the mission. Repairing those bridges will waste your time, and so will kicking out the German infantry guarding them. And so your initial turns will consist of attacking from Kassel, clear that railway up to the enemy defenders and try to kick them out so that you can repair that bridge on turn 1, and send your tanks through that intact crossing southeast to take Erfurt on turn 2, clearing this section of the railway line and taking that supply hub, which will be helpful to the guys advancing from the south. So the group you have at Schweinfurt advances along the edge of the map towards Erfurt. The supply situation in this area is rather difficult and they'll probably be running out of supply completely by the time they reach Erfurt. On turn 2, another reason for you to take that enemy supply hub, and don't set up any of yours in that area because you really don't need to hold it for anything. Just get your troops out of there. Also, try to get one of these tank divisions to touch the bridge between Erfurt and Gera by the end of turn 2. This will allow you to reach Leipzig a turn later and ultimately take it in 2 turns, and as you can see, it's a critical juncture for supplies and the progress of your operation. Send your northern tank group and a couple of infantry divisions along those roads north towards Magdeburg. The spot right between Erfurt, Magdeburg, and Leipzig is perfect for a supply hub, which is why you should clear that railway, and for your HQ, allowing your guys advancing towards Magdeburg to remain in supply and providing your HQ with reach to almost all of the rest of the map. It is also a good idea to attack Leipzig not just from the direction of Gera, but through that road bridge northwest of the town, making it easier to encircle it and attacking it with the river in the middle. Magdeburg shouldn't pose too big of an obstacle, but turn 5, which is when you should probably take it, is critical for another reason. The Germans get 3 very strong tank divisions as reinforcements around Berlin, and the first thing the AI usually does with them is send them as a fire brigade towards Magdeburg, hoping to destroy any of the breaches you've managed to create across the river. At this point, I can't give you any specific advice because I don't know the composition of your force. Your goal here is not to lose too many of your tanks, so using rear guard on the tanks that have crossed the major river is a good idea, and at the same time you must damage these 3 tank divisions as much as possible, ideally destroying 1 or 2 of those. In my successful run of this mission, I actually lured one of these tank divisions in Magdeburg, which I deliberately left empty, then obviously destroying it. Why is it so critical? The problem is that after that initial counterattack, the AI loves retreating them and then fortifying them in Berlin proper, making an assault on the city virtually impossible. So watch out for those tanks and try and kick their butts as hard as you can. Perfection is not required, but try to do your best. But once you're comfortable around Magdeburg and Leipzig and you've already crossed the major river, clear that railway and the railway bridge between Magdeburg and Leipzig, because that supply hub between Erfurt and Magdeburg is just not enough for your troops to comfortably advance in the north, and then do a pincer maneuver advancing both from the south and the north towards Wittenberg. The deadline for taking it is a little deceptive in my opinion. If you're taking it on turn 11, you're a bit too late for dealing with Potsdam, Zossen, everything else that remains. So push hard, try to lure out those mechanized divisions guarding it. One way to do it is leaving infantry divisions in plain hexes south of the town. It often is enough. Just take it and take the 101st Airborne Division card, using which here is not required but highly recommended. In fact, I still had my Polish Airborne Brigade card remaining from Market Garden and Battle for Bavaria, so I sent those Poles and then 101st Airborne Division into Berlin on the other bank of the river, helping you clear it and potentially assist you in taking Treptow and Berlin proper. Both Potsdam and Zossen are very much infantry objectives, and motorizing all of your infantry as much as you can up to that point is a really good idea. At Potsdam, you should cross the river just to avoid the river crossing during the attack, and in Zossen you just surround these guys and destroy them. With engineers, double fortification, and elite troops, they are a bit tough to dislodge, but you have my permission to sustain losses. Also, the units you use to cross the river at Potsdam can block that railway leading from Wittenberg to Berlin, and with Zossen and the other bank of the river in Berlin in your hands, the defenders of the city will be out of supplies, so bombard them with set-piece attacks and feint attacks, and ultimately, hopefully, take all of the objectives. It is possible, trust me. After the abject horror of Dash to Berlin, Unthinkable is this huge, wonderful congratulations cake that the developers have provided you with. It is indeed huge, and I had to cut out all of those distant objectives, Danzig, Warsaw, Krakow, and Sandomierz. And being this huge, it can feel a bit overwhelming. There's so many elite Soviet troops, all these tanks. How do I deal with them? Well, you're getting plenty of troops on your own. You get lots and lots of resources, and while it is a big, long mission, it's not going to be too difficult to crack. And the first question is, what do you do and where do you break through? And a single look at the map reveals that this is very much a Bialystok pocket / Citadele scenario, where you send two attacks directed towards each other to cut off a Soviet salient. And in our case, it will be the British attack through Stettin, leading further east towards Schneidermühl and ultimately Danzig. And by the way, Danzig is the only one of the distant objectives that will be defended, so certainly make use of the battleship card you get at Stettin. Actually, with the initial British thrust, it's a good idea to clear the entire area around Stettin. It's not going to be too difficult because most of these troops will get cornered because they will not have anywhere to retreat to. You'll be mostly destroying completely suppressed units, and you'll be able to relieve that British pocket. Past that, you should maintain a front line facing south. Don't attack, you will need those encircled Soviet troops for prisoners, but it's a good idea to exploit the terrain and probably leave some tanks in the plain hexes, because the Soviets there will still be able to counterattack on turn 1. And obviously, to deprive these Soviet troops of their supply, you will have to use your paratroop divisions, and in the British sector, one division, the lucky one, will go beyond Landsberg, send it into a forest it's unlikely to get dislodged by the Soviets, and the other, less lucky, British paratrooper division, just take the less experienced one for that, will be sent behind the 2nd Belarusian Front HQ, also blocking that railway line. You can't send paradrops on top of enemy HQs, but you still need to block that railway line, and these guys will just stand in the open and be mauled by Soviet tanks later, while still blocking that railway for one turn until your tanks arrive. Alright, let's look at the second breakthrough, and it is the 3rd American Army at Grunberg. While your initial approach there will be slightly more sluggish than in Stettin, the story there is virtually the same. Drop a paratrooper division next to Grunberg to block that pontoon bridge, and then just corner and destroy all of the units around them. And speaking of paratroopers, the other paratrooper division should be dropped north of Grunberg into that forest forested hex in between all those nasty Soviet tanks. In combination with the British drops, this will completely cut the supply of the Soviet troops near Berlin, thus completing the main objective of your airborne troops. Feel free to use the remaining 1 or 2 cards, airborne divisions that you have, on objectives of your choice, because cutting any other supply lines will be very difficult in the south. And what I did is send 1 division to cut the railway line behind the 2nd Ukrainian Front HQ, which is not a terrible idea because you don't have enough forces there to exploit the lack of supply, and you will just lose that paratrooper division. And my second bonus drop was 2 hexes above Breslau in that forest. While it doesn't block any serious supply lines just yet, it actually managed to distract a reasonable amount of Soviet forces and was resilient enough not to die and survive until the end of the mission. In any case, the US Third Army is gonna be in charge of taking most of the distant objectives in this mission. So past turn 1, push across the river through Grunberg, and that other crossing east of it, the Soviets will be somewhat passive and will mostly be focused on clearing all those paratroopers. So keep that railway between Frankfurt and Poznan blocked and gradually whittle down all those tanks that the enemy have in this area, while using the crossing east of Grunberg to push towards Kalisz, partially encircling the troops to the south of it, and ultimately reaching Warsaw, which is not defended, and pivoting towards Sandomierz. I faced a little counterattack south of Kalisz, and you might have to deal with occasional breaks in the supply line, so keep your HQ close to your leading troops. And as for the area around Poznan, once you clear it of enemy tanks, just maintain a weak infantry-based defensive line there, because you really don't need to break through. No objectives in that direction at all. Finally, in the south, i.e. US 5th and French 1st armies, don't expect as much sweeping success as for the Third Army and the British. The enemy forces here are more evenly matched, and don't try and push too far. The Soviet elite tank divisions will be very capable of destroying your own, which are not that numerous. So maintain a semi-defensive posture. Obviously, whittle down their infantry and tanks if you can. Use your tanks to guard the plain hexes and gradually advance towards Breslau. It is very takeable before turn 5, and once it's yours, continue with that strategy, destroying the Soviet troops there, ultimately reaching the bridges at the south end of the map, crossing the bridge, potentially helping out taking Krakow, and creating the southern pincer attack that envelops the Soviet troops on the other side of the river there, alongside the American Third Army. By that time, the northern pockets, i.e. around Berlin and Frankfurt, will be completely out of supply for a bunch of turns. Please don't attack these units too much, because as they lose supply, they'll start to disintegrate and shed. Stragglers and prisoners are one of your ultimate objectives, so hold your fire. Obviously take Frankfurt, it's going to be defended by completely suppressed enemies, it's not going to be difficult by turn 5, and that's pretty much the Unthinkable mission. It's a lot of fun and a very good reason to take the ahistoric branch of the campaign. And this is it for the campaign. The campaign is over. The game is over. I'm looking forward to new content in this game, and as I'm recording this, there's more coming. Expect more cracking sounds coming out of this channel, so subscribe, like, comment. Cheers.